All right, clearly speedometer. This is your mixture. Some people use to choke it when you're starting the car. I do not. I normally leave the mixture alone. That switch down there is the headlights. Pull it out to turn them on, push it in and turn them off. If you leave the headlights on, remember this car has no magneto, you are gonna run the battery dead. So I generally don't ever drive it at night, but they're there if you need them, and both of them work. Again, ignition switch, right? That's where you choke, that's car off. This is battery, that's magneto. This car does not have a functioning magneto, so you run on battery. This switch back here is a tail light, a red tail light. You can turn it on. It is pretty dim, but it does have one for legal. And then the brake, if you press the brake all the way down, there is a stop light in the back, a brake light. I don't know, you might have to have this switch on, and actually on is down, so a little confusing. This button just does something to the exhaust to make the car louder. I don't think it really does anything. I've never had to use it. I think it just makes the car louder. It might help if you're going up a hill or going down a hill, I'm not sure. Okay, here's where your coils go. There's only a modern coil in there right now. Normally you have coil boxes, but it's just the modern coil. All right, this is always one of his favorite parts. So gas tank. Gas tank's actually right under the seat. So you lift the seat up. The gas tank is right there. Right, you unscrew it. If you want to check how much gas there is, he's got a stick. You dip the stick. It tells you about 4 gallons. It is a gravity-fed tank. There is no filter on it. I think if you hit 2 gallons, you likely will, the car will likely not run after 2 gallons because of the gravity-fed tank. So I generally don't ever let it get below 2 gallons. There's a couple of sticks there. This whole deck here lifts up, and you can see the tank underneath of that. Hang on one second. Okay, I took the seat all the way out. If you lift this up, you'll see there's the whole tank. There's a couple of tools stashed down in there. There's room for more. There's some tools stashed over there. I've never actually been on that side, but there's the tank. I don't know how many gallons it is, but the seat just sits right on top of that. That's how you check it. All right, make sure you put a preservative in it before you store it for the winter, or you'll shellac everything. Here we are under the car. This is the back of the tranny. Those 2 petcocks there tell you how much oil you have. There is no dipstick. If you open the top one and oil comes out, there's too much oil. If you open the bottom one and oil comes out, that's enough oil, as long as it's not coming out the top. If you open the bottom and there's no oil coming out, then you're out of oil and you need to add some more. In this car, that's where you drain the oil, but it's not stripped, but you'll see when you look at it closely, there's an insert that is stripped. So I have been changing the oil through the bottom petcock. Normally I'll open them both up and I'll put a little, like a wire in there to clean them out, and I'll let them drain, and it'll take a half an hour for them to stop. And then I put a quart or 2 of oil in and run the car for a minute or 2, and then I drain that, and then I fill it back up. All right. I would recommend getting that fixed, but I'll be honest, I think you might have to pull the engine to actually fix that. If you find a club there, they might be able to help figure it out. That's how you check the oil level. That's how I've been changing it. Now you're looking at the bottom of the gas tank. This is the bulb, the gas bulb. It doubles as the filter as well. So there actually is no filter, but that bulb on the bottom collects sediment out of the gas. There's a lever at the top that shuts it off from the tank, and then this lever down here allows it to drain. So you can shut the tank off, drain the bulb out to get all the sediment out of it, and then that's the fuel line that goes up to the carburetor there. It is gravity fed only. If you let it set all winter, it is a little bit of a pain, because you'll see that actually goes up. So you have to open everything and let it fill very, very slowly. Sometimes it'll take a while to fill, and then you may have to actually crank on it for a while to pull gasoline through there with the choke to get gasoline into the float bowl of the carburetor, which is way up there in the front of the carburetor. So I try not to let the gas evaporate in the winter, but you do have to put a preservative in it if you want to do that, so it doesn't clog and shellac the line. It's not the end of the world if it happens. It's not very much line, and it's pretty easy to clean. It's just not what you want to do if you want to drive it. Okay. All right, I mentioned putting oil in. Oil goes in right here. I've been using 30 weight non-detergent. There's a big debate on whether you should use detergent or non-detergent. So I'm using straight 30 weight non-detergent. I did put all new spark plugs in, I put all new wires in, I gapped everything, I timed it. I put in all new stuff for the ignition. The distributor itself is not new, but the condenser and the points and all the gapping is new. So you should be good to go for that. And again, there's the carburetor. So you'll see this line that goes up, that actually goes inside the cockpit, and that's where you control your mixture from, right there. Here's one of the cups. We'll see if we can do it one-handed. You unscrew it. Okay. Bring it over here, maybe set it down on something wet or on a towel. You just take a thumb full of grease or a finger full of grease there and smoosh it in. Okay. And I wipe my hand off and try to keep the grass out of it, maybe. Good idea. Remember, this is one-handed. It's easier with two hands. And then that just goes right back on. Okay. Screw that right back on there. And then when you screw it down, it's forcing grease down there into that. That's the steering column one. Here's one here just did some work on. That's where the differential grease goes in, or the oil at 600 weight. This whole thing can have oil. It's not full, but oil winds up running down that tube and into the back of the axle here. And this is where it was leaking. It actually will leak out of the front and run around to the back and all over the brake drum. So that brake drum right there, I've cleaned it, but it probably needs to be replaced. That's called a Rocky Mountain brake shoe. So you probably need to still replace that. I also reassembled it and I put a shim in, and it might be worth having someone inspect it to make sure I did it right. I think I did, and I put a new seal in there to keep it from leaking, but that cotter pin comes out, that castle nut comes out. There's a special tool that screws onto these outside threads that lets you pull the wheel off. I don't have that tool. When I did this work, the wheel was so loose it just fell off. That's bad. So I put the new shim in, I tightened the castle nut down and put the cotter pin in, and it is now where it's supposed to be. But now the wheel won't come back off the axle. That's good. That's the way it's supposed to be. But we'll need to get a tool, or you'll need to get a tool and pull the wheel off, and maybe have someone double check that I put the shim in correctly, right? And then there's another seal you can put in there if you're worried about grease. But I would definitely have that done. It only takes about an hour to pull the whole thing off and to check all that out. Once you have the tool, it really comes off and goes back on quick and easy. Two things up there are grease cups. I don't know how many there are, but they're all around. Those actually unscrew, and you can like spoon grease up into that little cup. And then you screw the lid back on, and every time you make a turn, it squeezes some grease down into each of those fittings. That's one of the U-joints there, or the rear main. So when you want to put some grease and stuff, you just grab it and you just maybe do a quarter turn, and you know that actually puts some grease down in there. It's real hot right now, so it's turning real easy for me. But when it cools off, that grease congeals a little bit, and you'll know it when you put it in. So Grandpa always just said you do a couple of turns every so often. I hardly drive the thing, so I haven't been keeping real tight watch. But that's where the grease goes in to all the different fittings. Like I said, you'll see them all around the car. The other side of the thing, this is the horn, a big Ooga horn. Grandpa's got these all over the car. I don't think any of them work right now, but online they're pretty expensive, so it's probably worth trying to figure out if they can get repaired or if they just need new wiring. They were very cool. He would run them all off of this keyboard underneath of the steering wheel. So it was pretty cool for him to be able to pull up and play a little tune on it. That's a water pump that wasn't standard. Some people believe in them, some people say you shouldn't keep it. This one doesn't leak, so I'd leave it alone. This side of the radiator does have a little teeny leak sometimes over here. If it does, just wipe it up, and then I add radiator fluid if I need to after a drive. And then this is the fan belt. This fan belt's looking pretty ragged. You can take a look at it. It comes off pretty easy. There's another grease cup back there, and there's a half a dozen fan belts coming in boxes of parts. All right, that's it for this side of the engine, I think. All right, the radiator cap. It is on very loose. There is no pressure in the system. It's not designed that way. But you can see up here that little hole on the back side is a thermometer. And if the red on the thermometer gets all the way up to that hole, then I think Grandpa always considered that the car was too hot. So he did tell me that when he did parades in hot weather, stop and go, that the car would tend to get hot. But I never went with him. He didn't like a lot of parades. He liked to drive in the country. But if you take it in a parade, just be careful and watch that thermometer. When it gets up to that hole, you can see it from the driver's side, then I think you probably need to figure out how to let the car cool off. Okay, the other thing I think you could do when you drive in the parade, remember, is you can drive in low gear with a handbrake on. So you pull the handbrake part way up before the brake engages to hold the clutch in neutral. And then to go, all you got to do is press down, and when you want to stop, you just take your foot off. You don't have to float it. So the handbrake helps you find neutral easier. Now you will have to use the brake to come to a stop, but if you're going to decide to do a parade and you don't want to be getting out of the car restarting it all the time because you killed it, the handbrake's kind of a trick to do that. These lamps on the side are kind of cool, but they don't have any electricity. They were kerosene, so they don't do anything. The headlights do work. So, and I showed you that switch in there to the right of the clock, to the right of the coil box. I think that's it. All right, we normally keep the stool under the seat, but just beware that there's not a lot of room. And if you get two adults back there, they can bottom it out. So I think it's a much nicer ride when you're on the springs rather than bottoming out on the stool. So like I said, for kids, it's great. For adults, just be careful that they're not bottoming out. If they need to, just move the stool up to the front seat or back here into the back. I think Mary Kay made that. I'm not 100% sure, but I think she did. So, all right. This side of the car, get your spare tire and your battery. Now this car, I don't know where the battery was stored originally. Might be over there. Grandpa always had two batteries running parallel. These are 6-volt batteries. You can get them any place that sells stuff for a golf cart. That's the kind of battery they are. So he always ran two batteries in parallel, and he had a really cheap looking black plastic toolbox that they sat in. And when they went dead, I replaced it with a higher capacity single battery. But if you do a lot of traveling, I might put two batteries in parallel and put a different box down there. I don't like how this one looks, but I never found the time to build myself something that looked nicer. That's the spare tire. You'll notice that the whole rim comes off. There's 4 bolts that hold it on. That was not standard for this model year of car. I think Grandpa had those swapped, but it does make it easier to change the tire. And then they are still wooden spoke rims. The tires are pretty old, so they may need to have the rubber replaced, but if you're not doing a lot of traveling, I don't know that I'd worry about it too much. Last thing, I did put a lid on the battery, so you can just take that strap off to charge it. I had planned to invest in something called a bee tender or a beekeeper or a battery tender. It's about a $35 low voltage apparatus that hooks onto the battery, stays on the car, and you plug in like a 12-volt transformer to the wall. So it's a trickle charger. You can find them on Amazon. They're 30 or 40 bucks, and they make a 6-volt version, and you just plug in the car when you get home, and it will maintain the battery. If you get a big charger, like a regular car charger, they normally won't have a 6-volt trickle charge, and you will blow up the battery. It's a long story. I know they will actually explode. I had one of them explode on me because I didn't trickle charge it. I let it charge overnight, and it blew up all over my MGB. So that's it. Thing to be aware of. And I can tell you this, but you need to experience it. You can see how those wheels, the camber is reverse. The bottom of the wheels are closer in and the top is further out. So that's reverse of a modern car. And when you turn those wheels all the way right or to the left, there's something about the geometry where they literally kind of lay over like a sled. And it will cause the car to grab the road, and it will spin you into an oversteer, basically. And that's kind of bad. If you're going around a corner and you oversteer, you'll oversteer into a ditch. Now that happened to me once, and I didn't put it in the ditch, but it was close. I recommend that you go to a cul-de-sac and do a U-turn. It's got a very tight radius of turning, and then keep going, and don't go fast. You'll have to feather the clutch and all that. But there'll be a point where you turn the wheel and you will feel the wheels grab and yank the car. And you probably need to feel where that's at and what it acts like, so you know what to expect when it happens. It's very disconcerting, but it's worth doing so you get a feel for the car.